makers and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
So good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, we're joined by Ken Moelis, one of the most recognizable deal makers on Wall Street, founder, chairman, and chief executive of global investment bank Moelis and Company. Ken, it's so good to have you here today. I mean, there's a lot to talk about. We're looking at NATO. I know you're also stepping down from Moelis, but overall, I mean, there's just so much out there. Like, how do you cut out the noise from the policy matters that matters to investment?
You know, that's a great question, by the way, and it's good to be here when nothing's happening and nothing's to talk about.
At all.
But what's interesting is if you keep your eyes on the long term, I'm very optimistic. I think the problem with the world today is, you know, pessimists get the headlines. I mean, everybody trying to point out everything negative that can happen. But if you really look at this over a number of years instead of a number of hours or a number of days, I think the world very optimistic. I mean, even what's happening in the Middle East is you can look at it negative, or you can look at it and say this is an opportunity for one of the most optimistic changes in the region that we've had in a long time.
But Ken, I mean, there's a lot of turbulence, right? So a lot of chief executives that you service, where you put deals together, will be, if not freaking out, certainly sitting on their cash or not wanting to sell.
That would be a mistake. I think, you know, again, I think the pessimists get the headlines and optimists build businesses. And if you look at it, it's funny, you know, you read these headlines about all the problems, and then you see that the optimists who come up every day and understand that the world is getting better every day. And if you actually look out in the next 6 to 12 months, I actually think you'll see, you know, tax rates are not going up in most of the major economies. Europe is right now talking about opening up spending. I think European growth rates are going to go higher, which will result in European stock markets, I think, reflecting better growth. I'm very bullish on Europe, by the way, and I think some of I call it the provocation of the U.S. election might have actually caused some things in Europe to accelerate growth and become very optimistic. So I'm very positive about that. Lower regulations, lower energy prices, European growth. If you take your eyes off of the day-to-day, you know, warnings, and you get out of your Twitter account, you'll start to build. You'll see that this is going to be a good year, I think.
What about fragmentation? I mean, you know, geopolitics, the rise of inflation. I mean, I feel like I'm the pessimist, and I'm never the pessimist. But there needs to be some kind of balance, right, in how you see the world.
I think the inflation's coming down. Look, the U.S. 10-year is coming down. Inflation in the European region is under control. I know there's been, what do tariffs do? I look at tariffs as, really, I think tariffs are a tax. When you actually break it down, tariffs are a different way of taxing items. Taxes are deflationary, are not pro-growth. It's a choice made politically on how to tax people. We can debate that, but I actually don't think it's inflationary.
What's your outlook for deal making?
I think deal making is going to accelerate dramatically. You look at, again, the flood of capital into private credit, and private credit is, look, there's a whole line about a real estate developer, if they can obtain money, they'll build. I think the same joke could be made of private equity going forward. If they can borrow money, they're going to buy companies. And I think private credit, the acceleration and the money coming in, is just going to provide the opportunity and the pressure almost to go back out there. There is a lot of growth. I think the whole AI power,
right.
There's a tremendous amount of growth out there, and I think we're going to be back in a pretty significant deal-making environment.
I mean, again, when you look at actually the rise of AI, what does it mean for private equity, private credit investment in the software space?
Usually these things have, again, the headlines are all, oh, woe is me, and then the opportunity is businessmen use these tools to create better products, better margins, better work environment. I'm hoping, I think my new CEO coming in, Navid, said, we hope that AI will improve the lives of our associates and analysts as some of the real drudgery of the work becomes attainable through AI. Again, when I joined 45 years ago now, used to go down to the library and pull annual reports out and then write down in pencil what they said. So, again, we've come a long way to improving life.
Ken, when you look at some of the concerns, I guess, surrounding, for example, the Middle East, I know you've done a lot of businesses in the Middle East, you've done a lot of investments. I mean, this, you're quite optimistic longer term, but does this turbulence impact, oil prices? Does it impact actually some of the sentiment in the region?
Yes, and when you say long term, we're talking 6 to 12 months. I mean,
long term, very long term, given these financial markets.
That's become long term. Yes, I think oil prices have declined dramatically. But by the way, that's a basic input for every product in the world is energy prices. And again, all I hear about is what if the peace doesn't hold? I haven't heard one person said, what if the 90 million population of highly educated, motivated Iranians come into the market? What if the 200 million barrels of reserves, which has probably had no technology applied to drilling? I mean, I can't imagine what the tech has gone into Iranian drilling. What if those reserves come on the market? What does that mean to energy? So nobody's talking about the positives. And what's unusual about the world is that those things are usually what everybody gets up in the morning and works toward.
But what does that mean? I mean, again, where do you see the best values? If you're looking at trade and tariffs, and this is something that we haven't really touched on, are we going to redraw the way that deals are made? So is it going to be from friendly country to friendly country? And what does it mean for a shop like Moelis? Well,
I do think, by the way, and I know there's been a lot of speculation about Europe over the last 10 or 15 years. This should be a 5-year fantastic period for Europe. The UK has been especially very undervalued in the market. The undervaluation, though, has come from the lack of growth. The public markets want growth, and there just hasn't been enough growth. I think with what we're watching this morning, people walking up the mic and trying to say how much their governments are going to spend, this is a very different Europe and a very different program. So, yeah, I do think you could see cross-border activity accelerate. I think you could see growth in Europe accelerate. And the U.S. tends to find a way to grow. And I think, given that the West Coast is still the center of AI and the center of some of that, I think the U.S. continues to have pretty good growth.
So, Ken, on your view of the U.K., like how's business here in the City of London? Is there anything that the U.K. government could do to attract more bankers?
Well, I don't know if they want to attract more bankers. If they attract more growth and more business, they will attract more bankers. That might not be their goal, by the way. But yes, I do think it's funny. I mentioned the fact yesterday at a meeting that, optimism builds businesses. And you could tell the UK, I would say, has been very down. The business community has been down for the last 2 years. It's interesting when I come over here a lot, and the change when you leave New York and you land here in what's going to happen. I think that's changing. I think the government is going to help. I think just the growth in expenditures from European governments is going to help. Look, the UK has a great intellectual base, has a great business base, has great capital markets, and I'm very bullish. If you want more bankers, we're hiring them, so we're putting people in. We just moved committed to a new space, expanded our space dramatically, and we're hiring.
And is this to service UK clients?
Yes,
or
UK.
Is it just for also international investment that's coming from abroad to the UK?
No, this is UK. I mean, we probably have 140 people here. I wouldn't be surprised if that's up 50% in the next few years. And again, we service a lot of Europe from here, but we're expanding in Europe as well. We think it's a great time to do it.
Again, your take on the Middle East? I mean, I know a big chunk of your business, of course, in the Middle East. You're expecting it to settle. Again, what time frame?
Very rapidly. I think you and I spoke about this. One of the things I noticed, and the world should notice, is that Saudi Arabia stayed. Even in Ukraine, Russia, and Israel, Iran has stayed, I think, the rock of stability. And I think that was a great message that the Middle East wants to be about business. They really want to grow their people, grow their worth, the net worth of the bring people into the middle class. What just happened has the possibility of just being a phenomenal stabilizing event. And if we can get everybody into thinking about capitalism and growing their people into middle class and the way what Saudi Arabia has been doing with their population, this would be a remarkable event. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think there's a better chance than there's been in the last 40 years in my adult lifetime.
Do you worry about, U.S. exceptionalism being put in question. So not even coming to an end, but just, question marks from allies around the world and big investors.
No, in U.S. exceptionalism, I don't know. It's
a big word to mean everything and anything.
Look, the U.S., I think the reason the U.S. does so well is they get up is rewarded an optimistic view of the future. Failure is not penalized with a death sentence in your business career. Yeah. It's amazing on the West Coast of the United States, you can fail 5 times and everybody will still throw money at you. Very few places in the world, people will look at that as experience, not total failure if you're a quality person. So, look, I think the U.S. has that. I do think there are elements of, it was interesting today, the New York City mayor election, in which a very significant outlier event seems to have happened where you say the battle is still on, but between the political future of where the country wants to go. But I'm pretty optimistic that that's a New York City problem. I think the country wants to go to growth. Okay,
so it's not, this was basically the Democratic primary, right, in New York, and it's gone definitely more socialist than middle stream, let's put it that way. Yes. You don't think this is the way the Democratic Party at large is going?
Well, that's a great question. The Democratic Party will have to answer that. I believe the Democratic Party has to come up with a pro-growth agenda. They have gotten themselves into the agenda is how anti-Trump you can be. That's not an agenda that people want. Well, and what happened in New York is the candidate that threw in that it's just a race to be how anti-Trump you can be. You're going to throw in some pretty devastatingly negative policies out there, and you're going to win because if that's the race. So I think the party's waiting to be defined with a pro-growth, I think pro-private economy message, but they have to find that, and I think it's a dangerous time for the Democratic Party.
Ken, when you travel around the world, how often do you get asked about Trump policies to help them make sense of actually where the U.S. goes in 1 year?
All the time. Every meeting, every day.
And you explain? How do you explain it?
Well, look, as I had the fortune or misfortune, you could say I banked Trump in a lot of in the early 90s. Yeah. I got to know him and did some things. Look, he's got a method of negotiating, and I think you could see it, but it's start out with a very difficult maximalist position. Mm-hmm. I think his secret ingredient is to take that position further than most businessmen would be willing to take it on the risk parameter. By the way, it's dangerous. I'm not saying everybody shouldn't do that. It works for him most times. Sometimes it doesn't, but that's the way he's done it. And I think what's appealing about him to the American people right now is just the radical authenticity. They feel like they're seeing the real person out there. I mean, yesterday when he was getting on the helicopter and he started cursing at the Iran and Israel at the same time, I don't know if he plans that, yeah. But ultimately I think there were a bunch of people on both sides happy that he was yelling at the other side.
Yes, it encompasses everyone. What are you most looking forward to, actually, as you transition from being CEO to executive chairman of the company?
I'm glad you said it. Said the leaving CEO. Now, I'm not going anywhere. I love this business. The trouble with if you put your name on the door and you create a company, it's a long transition, and it's much better to start earlier than later. And I think we surprised people. I started a year or two before people thought. I have a lot of energy. That's the best part of it. And look, I'm here with clients in London. I'm going on my way to Paris. I think you get to spend more time with clients. Mm-hmm. And I think I've stuck my friend and co-founder Navid with some of the inside dirty laundry that you have to take care of every day. So I wish him good luck with that. And I look forward to being out with clients more.
Ken, thank you so much. I hope you come back really soon. Ken Moelis, they're founder, chairman, and chief executive of global investment bank Moelis and Company. Now, we're just getting some live pictures from the NATO summit in The Hague as world leaders arrive for talks. We're expecting, of course, to hear from President Trump and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte shortly. This is Bloomberg.
We will be a responsible ally, as we've always been. The issue here is that the coverage of those capabilities will come at a cost. And what we're saying is that this particular cost for Spain, as we've estimated within our Ministry of Defense, will amount to a specific number, which is, in terms of percentage of GDP, 2.1%.
Well, that was the Spanish Economy Minister, Carlos Cuerpo, speaking exclusively to Bloomberg about Spain's resistance to a goal of spending 5% of GDP on defense. Now, earlier we also asked the EU's Foreign Affairs and Security Policy Chief, Kaja Kallas, about the summit's goals and the situation in Iran.
The international law says, gives you good two reasons where you can use force. One is self-defense, and the other one is by the mandate of the Security Council. So those who use force have to also justify that it complies with the international rules.
And are you satisfied that it does, or you're not sort of in a position to make that appraisal quite yet?
Well, that is not up to us to say, really. Of course, we have said that the Atomic Energy Association needs to have assessment and also get an access to the nuclear sites and everything that is concerning Iran. Europe has always been very concerned that Iran does not acquire a nuclear weapon. We have been very clear on that.
And onto the business of NATO, are you confident that everybody will sign on without caveat, without exception, to the 5% NATO goal? Are we going to get that, or do you think that Spain is going to pose a problem there?
Well, we have heard, of course, Spain raising the issues that they are raising. I think it's important that we get the decision of moving to 5%. It's a very ambitious target, also requires a lot of difficult decisions from member states. That is very clear. And, the trouble with the defense spending is that you need to do it while you have peace. And actually, people don't need or don't see the necessity of the defense spending. But when you actually need it, it's too late because of everything. And right now, the understanding for everybody is that we need to invest more in order to deter aggressors from looking our way.
And have you spoken to Pedro Sánchez? Are you afraid that this could potentially endanger the whole sort of project here?
Of course, NATO Secretary General is working on that. I tried to keep the European countries together, and we have also put forward, different means how member states can do this. I mean, opening financial possibilities for member states to actually spend more, and also how we can do more jointly, joint procurement, joint projects, because the defense is regional, not national anymore.
Well, that was the EU's Foreign Affairs and Security Chief, Kaja Kallas, speaking with Oliver Crook at the NATO summit in The Hague. And Oliver joins us now. So, Ollie, what are we actually expecting this morning as leaders arrive?
Yeah, Francine, we're watching the leaders arrive right now. I believe we have Giorgia Meloni now arriving, as we've just seen, a number of other leaders. Keir Starmer, we believe Donald Trump is in the building. We saw the beast go by. We didn't see him walk in. And expecting to hear from, Mark Rutte and all of these leaders that are here assembled really in what feels like the court of Trump, right? He has now arrived in the Netherlands. This has been an event that has been highly choreographed to please Trump, and all of its sort of substance and its frills has been directed at Trump. On the frill side of things, you saw this sort of text messages that were sent by Mark Rutte to Donald Trump overnight, speaking in highly sort of Trumpian language with all caps, praising the president's leadership and saying that he could have a big win here in Europe, because they're expecting the substance of the summit to include that 5% GDP defense spend from all of these sort of allies within NATO. Now, the fly in the ointment has been there's been some disagreement about whether or not Spain can actually achieve its military goals and its obligations to NATO without reaching that 5%, or I should say without reaching the 3.5% of that 5% that is supposed to go to hard military hardware. That has been a very sort of open debate. We heard from Marco Rubio out in Politico basically saying that that's not good enough, Spain, and that you're really letting down your NATO allies. So we'll see what Trump has to say about that. We'll see if there's any interaction between Trump and the likes of Pedro Sánchez, who just walked into the building. And of course, there's the other sort of issue, the issue of Iran, that hangs over this. I think that for the most part, the Secretary General, Mark Rutte, would not like to bring that up. But, there was a little bit of conflict between his views, Trump's views, and Emmanuel Macron's.
Ollie, we're just looking at at pictures. We were expecting a press conference of the U.S. President Donald Trump and the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte delivering remarks. The camera work on this is a little bit hazy, but I think they're just, trying to get to the two leaders who are talking. Let's listen to some of these remarks.
This would not have happened in 3 stages. When you became president in 2016, 2017, you forced Europeans and Canadians to pay more. At this moment, the result of that phase is 1 trillion extra aggregate defense spending by the Canadians and the Europeans. Then came phase 2, when you became president in January last year. Phase 2 is that all the countries not yet on 2% have now committed to the 2%. This is the old goal from Wales in 2014. 7 were not on 2%. Some were saying somewhere in the 2030s. Now this year, all of them, including Canada, including Italy, including Belgium, they have all now committed to the 2%. And now comes the big splash. Today, we will decide to go to 5%. We have to keep ourselves safe from our adversaries, but also because it is fair to equalize with the United States. With this 5%, the Europeans and the Canadians will equalize their defense spending with the United States. So this is not about American taxpayers paying more. This is about Europeans, Canadians paying more. And again, this would not have happened. I'm really saying this here. And some people might criticize me, but then when I speak with them, they all say, yes, you're right. This would not have happened if you would not have been elected in 2016 and re-elected last year and back into office in January. So I want to thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great victory for everybody, I think. And we will be equalized very shortly, and that's the way it has to be. It's going to be a lot of money, too, a lot of defense.
Trillions extra.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a great relationship, and we've had a great relationship from the beginning. Highly respected man, and we appreciate you being here too, everybody. We really do. We have a tremendous group of people on my left and a tremendous group of people on my right. They might be even better than my people. I don't know. Let's have a fight. Let's figure it out. Anyway, but we appreciate it, and we've had a tremendous relationship, Mark and I, and we've really worked on this subject for a long time.
Yeah.
When Biden was here, it just died like everything else died. And now it's, you're going to take, I guess, a vote today, right?
Absolutely. Today we will decide unanimously to do this. That's my absolute conviction.
So we can't talk about it until the vote's taken, because sometimes, strange things happen with those. But I think you're going to
not too worried.
I think you're going to do very well. Everyone's very happy about it. Go ahead, yes.
Mr. President, how is the Iran-Israel ceasefire going, in your opinion?
I think very good. Israel came back yesterday. I was so proud of them because they came back. They went out because they felt it was a violation. And technically they were right, but it just wouldn't have worked out very well. And they brought the planes back. They had gone on to another journey because there was a little bit of a violation. And I said, you got to get them back. And they came back, and it was a great thing. And it's going very well.
Mr. President, what is your response to the foreign minister saying he still wants to enrich nuclear?
Hello, Katie. She's so great, this one. Any question she asks, I'll answer. Well, maybe I better not say that. What was your question?
What is your response to the Iranian foreign minister continuing to say Iran will enrich uranium and pursue nuclear weapons?
Well, I don't know if they've said that, but I'll tell you, the last thing they want to do is enrich anything right now. They want to recover. And we won't let that happen, number one. Militarily, we won't. I think we'll end up having somewhat of a relationship with Iran. I see it. Look, I've had a relationship over the last 4 days. They agreed to the ceasefire. And it was a very equal agreement. They both said, that's enough. They both said it. But no, they won't do that. The last thing they want to do, Katie, is enrich. They're not looking to... They're not... Can you imagine after all of that, they're going to say, oh, let's go and do a bomb. There could be a day in the future, and then somebody else taking our place will be saying, don't do it. And maybe they won't do it as well, I don't know. But they're not going to have a bomb, and they're not going to enrich. And we believe all of the stuff is down there. We don't think they had nearly the time, because to get that out is a very difficult thing. It's not like moving a package or taking this carpet up and moving it. It's very difficult. It's very dangerous to do. We believe it's all down there. We had a tremendous victory, a tremendous hit, and because of that, I don't think they would have been down there, because they knew we were coming. When they know we're coming, they're not going to be down in that 30 stories underground. So no, I think it was just a tremendous victory for everybody, including Iran. Look, they've got a country, and they've got oil, and they're very smart people, and they can come back. Israel got hit very hard, especially the last couple of days. Israel was hit really hard. Those ballistic missiles, boy, they took out a lot of buildings. And they've been great. Bibi Netanyahu should be very proud of himself. And they've really been great. But they're not going to be building bombs for a long time.
Mr. President, what's your reaction to the intelligence reports saying that the Iranian nuclear sites were only partially devastated, not entirely?
Yeah, well, they said it was actually, the report said it could have been they don't know. I mean, they did a report. I could have Pete talk to it because his department did the report. They really don't know. I think Israel's going to be telling us very soon because Bibi is going to have people involved in that whole situation. We hear it was obliteration. It was a virtual obliteration. When you take a look at the ground above, don't forget, the flame is all underground. But everything above, if you look at the before and the after picture, everything above is burned black. The trees, everything. There's one building, but that's a building that sunk substantially into the granite, so that, you know, the fire goes right over it. I believe it was total obliteration. I believe they didn't have a chance to get anything out because we acted fast. If it would have taken 2 weeks, maybe, but it's very hard to remove that kind of material. Very hard and very dangerous for them to remove it. Plus, they knew we were coming, and if they know we're coming, they're not going to be down there. There aren't too many people that are going to be down there. Pete, do you have something to say about that?
Well, Mr. President, when you talk to the people who built the bombs, understand what those bombs can do, and deliver those bombs, they landed precisely where they were supposed to, so it was a flawless mission.
Flawless.
Right down where we knew they needed to enter, and given the 30,000 pounds of explosives and capability of those munitions, it was devastation underneath Fordo. And the amount of munitions, 6 per location, any assessment that tells you it was something otherwise is speculating with other motives. And we know that because when you actually look at the report, by the way, it was a top secret report, it was preliminary, it was low confidence. All right, so this isn't, you make assessments based on what you know.
They said it could be very devastating, very serious.
Moderate to severe, and we believe far more likely severe and obliterated. So this is a political motive here.
Was there a leak investigation?
Of course, we're doing a leak investigation with the FBI right now because this information is for internal purposes, battle damage assessments, and CNN and others are trying to spin it to make the president look bad when this was an overwhelming success.
We had a tremendous success, and this is the New York Times. I call it the failing New York Times. It's going to hell. And CNN, which, as you know, very few people are watching. And you would think they'd do the opposite. You would think they'd want to say, this was an unbelievable success. And the thing that hurts me is it's really demeaning to the pilots and the people that put that whole thing together, the generals. That was a perfect operation. And when you look at the holes, and this was done from 52,000 feet, there was no moon, there was no light, and those 3 holes are right together. And also, and nobody talks about this, we shot 30 Tomahawks from submarines, in particular one submarine, but that was 400 miles away. Mm-hmm. And every one of those Tomahawks hit within a foot of where they were supposed to hit, took out a lot of buildings that Israel wasn't able to get. We took them out with Tomahawks. We don't even talk about that. This was a devastating attack, and it knocked them for a loop. And, you know, if it didn't, they wouldn't have settled. If they had won, if we didn't take it out, they wouldn't have settled. Somebody mentioned that to me last night. If that thing wasn't devastated, they would have never settled. Marco, do you have something to say?
No, first of all this stuff about the intelligence, this is what a leaker is telling you the intelligence says. That's the game these people play. They read it, and then they go out and characterize it the way they want it characterized, and they're leakers. This is the game they play. So that's number one. Number two, here's a fact. The conversion facility, which you can't do a nuclear weapon without a conversion facility. We can't even find where it is, where it used to be on the map. You can't even find where it used to be because the whole thing is just blackened out. It's gone.
It's wiped out.
It's wiped out. Then we dropped 12 of the strongest bombs on the planet right down the hole in 2 places. Everything underneath that mountain is in bad shape. And I refer you to the statement of the IAEA, Mr. Grossi. You know what he said? He said there was Iran, the way it looked the day before the attack, and what their nuclear program looks like now. 2 very different things. They are way behind where they were just 7 days ago. Now, anything in the world can be rebuilt, but now we know where it is. And if they try to rebuild it, we'll have options there as well. But all this leaker stuff, these leakers are professional stabbers. That's what they are. They go out and they read this stuff, and then they tell you what it says against the law, but they characterize it for you in a way that's absolutely false. There's no way Iran comes to the table if somehow nothing had happened. This was complete and total obliteration. They're in bad shape. They are way behind today compared to where they were just 7 days ago because of what the president did.
Marco, can I just alert you to one other aspect? So the great thing is you took out the nuclear capability of Iran. This was crucial. You did it in a way which is extremely impressive. But the signal sends to the rest of the world that this president, when it comes to it, yes, he is a man of peace, but if necessary, he is willing to use strength, the enormous strength of the American military. So I think that signal to the rest of the world, this is far beyond Iran, is extremely important. So let me also point us to that aspect of what happens.
They went down, Iran went down to the site afterwards. They said it's so devastated, and they settled when they saw what we did to it. And frankly, if we didn't do that, they would have had a lot of ammunition to keep going. They wouldn't have settled. Somebody brought that up, and 2 Iranians went down to see it, and they called back, and they said, this place is gone. So it's just fake news by CNN, which has got no ratings. It's a failed network. Anybody here from CNN, by the way? Because you're a really disgraceful network. MSNBC, I think, is actually worse. But they're all pretty bad. But yours is good, Katie, I'll tell you.
Mr. President,
You know what Marco reminded me that he did such a nice job there. It was 9 years ago I had to debate this guy. He was not easy. I think he even got better. But when you were into your little thing, I said, this is when I had to debate this guy. You think it's easy to debate him? It's not easy.
How long do you think that the Iranian nuclear program has been put back by these strikes? Years or totally obliterated?
I think basically decades, because I don't think they'll ever do it again. I just don't think they're going to do it. I think they're going to take their oil, they're going to have some missiles, and they'll have some defense. I think they've had it. I mean, they just went through hell. I think they've had it. The last thing they want to do is enrich. They've been trying to do it. By the way, it's hard to enrich. And, you know, when you look at a site like that, very, very hard to build. Very, very hard, very expensive. They spent trillions of dollars trying to do this thing, and they didn't come up with it. And we're actually getting along with them very well right now. But had we not succeeded with that hit ended the war. That hit ended the war. I don't want to use an example of Hiroshima. I don't want to use an example of Nagasaki. But that was essentially the same thing. That ended that war. This ended that with the war. If we didn't take that out, they'd be fighting right now.
Mr. President?
Yeah.
If the Iranians do rebuild, would the United States...
If they rebuild?
Would the United States strike again? And I have also a question about Russia.
But I'm not going to have to worry about that. It's gone for years. Very tough to rebuild because the whole thing has collapsed. In other words, inside, it's all collapsed. Nobody can get in to see it because it's collapsed. You can't go in to see a room that has, 10 million tons of rock in it. And the tunnels are totally collapsed.
But if they rebuild?
Well, they've already looked at the tunnels. This was an unbelievable hit by genius pilots and genius people in the military, and they're not being given credit for it because we have scum that's in this group, and not all of you are. You have some great reporters, but you have scum. CNN is scum. MSDNC is scum. The New York Times is scum. They're bad people. They're sick. And what they've done is they're trying to make this unbelievable victory into something less. Now, even they admit that it was hit very hard, okay? But it wasn't hit hard. It was hit brutally, and it knocked it out. The original word that I use, I guess it got us in trouble because it's a strong word. It was obliteration. And you'll see that. And it's going to come out. Israel is doing a report on it now, I understand. And I was told that they said it was total obliteration. They have guys that go in there after the hit, and they say it was total obliteration. And, I don't want it for me. I want it for the pilots. I want it for the military. They did such a good job. If you were in the Situation Room with me, with the generals and all of the people that did such a good job, and then they get demeaned by these idiots at CNN who can't get ratings, the place is dying. Nobody wants to even waste their time going on their shows. So they form with the New York Times, who's dying also. Without Trump, you wouldn't have a New York Times.
And then just changing gears to your meeting with Zelensky later today, can you give us any preview of what the two of you might be discussing?
No, we'll discuss the obvious. We'll discuss his difficulty. He's got a little difficulty. Zelensky. He's a nice guy. I mean, I'm going to meet him today. I don't know. I assume we're going to be discussing Ukraine.
Yes.
I mean, it seems like the most
Is
likely
there
subject.
any restart talks there or anything that you might do?
Well, we're going to see. I mean, I've spoken to Putin a lot, and he actually was very nice. He volunteered help on, as you know, on Iran. I said, no, I don't need help on Iran. I need help on Russia. Okay? I said, do me a favor. Help us on Russia, not on Iran. But he was very nice. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk. I think progress is being made. I think great progress is being made on Gaza. I think because of this attack that we made, I think we're going to have some very good news. I was talking to Steve Witkoff, who, by the way, is terrific, and who knows more about this subject than anybody, the subject of what we were just talking about. He was on last night with Jesse and with Laura and with Sean. And boy, Susie has a great take on it. He just explains it so easily. He's really very knowledgeable. But he did tell me that Gaza is very close.
One follow-up on Iran. Both you and Secretary Rubio and Hegseth mentioned the leaders. But can you clarify, is the intelligence correct or is the intelligence wrong?
Well, the intelligence was very inconclusive. The intelligence says we don't know. It could have been very severe. That's what the intelligence says. So I guess that's correct. But I think we can take the we don't know. It was very severe. It was obliteration. And you'd think that a media outlet would say, isn't that a great thing? I mean, more importantly for the pilots, for the military, you take their guts out. You take their absolute guts out. They had a tremendous attack. It was a complete obliteration. The other team, the other group, Iran, said, let's stop this. And you know what? Israel said it too. Very smart. They fought like hell, and then they said, let's stop. And they're going to build themselves. And I really see it as sticking. I mean, we may do papers on it, Marco. Maybe we're going to do papers. I don't even know if you need them. They're not going to be fighting each other. They've had it. They've had a big fight, like two kids in a schoolyard. You know, they fight like hell. You can't stop them. Let them fight for about 2-3 minutes. Then it's easy to stop them.
And then Daddy has to sometimes use strong language.
You have to use strong language. Every once in a while you have to use a certain word.
I think we have to join the others.
Yes, we're going to join some other group. Yes, thank you. Katie, one
last question. Do you believe that
she's so good. That's the only reason I take.
Thank you, Mr. President.
She used to be very difficult. Go ahead.
Do you believe that this strike on the Iranian nuclear program will lead to the release of the hostages in Gaza?
I think that it helped a little bit. It showed a lot of power. Yeah, I think it helped. But we're going to get separately, even before this, we were very close to making a deal on Gaza. I think this helped, yes. Okay? Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Well, that was, of course, the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, with the U.S. President Donald Trump speaking in The Hague, and then they have a busy day meeting with a lot of world leaders. The key takeaway is probably that, you know, the NATO leaders are trying to play down some of the concern over Trump's defense commitment. And you have seen through multiple talks with multiple leaders of Europe really trying to talk down the fact that there was concern in certain factions in Europe that maybe the U.S. is not as strong as an ally as in the past. Now let's bring in Oliver Crook again. So Ollie, if you listen to that, I mean, you know, Donald Trump not only addressed NATO, but he addressed Iran, he addressed Gaza. What were your main key takeaways?
Yeah, so notably, obviously, Mark Rutte began the conversation, the Secretary General of NATO, trying to really keep the conversation focused on the defense pledges that have been made or that will be made later today by the NATO allies, hitting that 5% and trying to get sort of some buy-in from Trump, saying that, you know, this is a good thing, we're happy about it. And Mark Rutte said that basically this is a commitment that NATO would never have arrived at without the President of the United States, which I think is a fact that is, I think, pretty widely acknowledged. I think that is certainly true. Didn't get too far for, you know, and Trump seemed to be in pretty good spirits. He said, you know, I have great people with me. There are great people here in Europe. Maybe they're even better than my people, being quite lighthearted, if a little bit subdued. And then he was asked pretty immediately about the ceasefire in Iran with Israel, asked whether or not that was holding. He said that it was going well. And then it went very swiftly on to the intelligence that we report that we've seen this morning, that potentially the damage that has been wrought on those Iranian nuclear facilities was not quite as bad as the Trump administration has said. And he was asked basically for most of the press conference about that, continuing to defend that they had been obliterated, while at the same time saying that basically the intelligence report that went out was inconclusive. So that was really occupied the bulk of the conversation. He was also asked about whether or not his meeting with Zelensky, what he expected to get out of that. He didn't really give much information on that other than saying that he's been in contact with Putin, and Putin's been very nice. He also then went to go on to talk about Gaza. And I think this was a little bit of the concern going into this meeting, that the focus wouldn't just stay on NATO. But again, Trump also reserved the right to basically say what he wanted to say about NATO in Article 5 until after the vote, because he said, anything could happen in these votes. And that was sort of the summary of what we just heard from the President of the United States, sitting alongside Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO.
Ali, thanks so much. Oliver Crook there with the very latest. Again, Donald Trump going beyond NATO, saying, look, a ceasefire between Iran and Israel is going well. He also believes that the last thing Iran wants to do is enrich anything. And he says, I think we'll have somewhat of a relationship with Iran. Now, the EU plans to impose retaliatory tariffs on U.S. imports, including on Boeing planes, if President Trump puts a baseline levy on the bloc's goods. Now, officials expect the U.S. to keep some duties in place even after trade negotiations are concluded. Now, to talk trade and tariffs, we're joined by Anahita Thoms, partner at Baker & McKenzie, and Myron Brilliant, senior counselor at DGA Group. So thank you both for joining us. Myron, you also follow geostrategic, relationships. What did you make of, first of all, just the body language between Mark Rutte, representative of NATO, and Donald Trump? Can allies still rely on the U.S.? And that must have a read across also for tariffs.
Well, thank you for letting us on today. But let me just say three quick things. One is I think that it's clear that this is a diplomatic and political victory for President Trump. The commitment of the NATO countries to go up to 5% is something he pushed hard on. And I think the fact that we have the Secretary General endorsing President Trump's leadership is a clear indication of a victory. The second is it's in the context of three wars. He's coming off a very important week in which he has, I think, for now, has a fragile ceasefire between Iran and Israel. That's good. We'll have to see if peace can come out of this. We'll have to see what happens next. But it's an important victory for him in the domestic context. So he's speaking to a domestic U.S. audience here as much as he's speaking to the NATO audience. What he's trying to convey clearly is that we had a military success. Right. Now we're moving on to a ceasefire, and I led the charge to get that done. Yeah. And he's trying to tie that together. He's a little defensive on what was accomplished. Yeah. Naturally, we're going to find that out in due course. But what's really important is he's focused also on the road ahead.
Anahita, if he does actually have this win in terms of defense spending, does it make him cool off trade and tariffs?
I don't think that it will cool off there. I think it's an ongoing process, and this is the uncertainty, of course, that our companies face in the European Union, but also globally, because, as I always say, it's not just about tariffs, it's the uncertainty that breaks.
Yeah, but it's unclear to me whether actually Trump wants the money from tariffs and trade, or whether he just wants the deal, whether he wants to be the person to make sure that Europe just gives him what he wants. And this would be seen as a win for him.
It could be both, right? He wants to raise revenue to offset the huge tax bill that's coming through the Congress this summer. But he also has been very clear from day one. He feels that there has to be fairness in the trading system, and the United States has been ripped off. Whether you agree with him or not, he's been consistent on his approach about tariffs. The Europeans have to get on board with the fact that they're going to have to make some concessions. We're closer in these trade talks between the two sides. Yeah. There's a framework on non-tariff barriers, not just on the tariff issues, but there's still questions from Europe. They want to be treated on an equal footing with the United States. And you're right. I think uncertainty is what, is causing a hold up on capital investments. Companies want certainty in the process. So whether it's 10% or some other number, stability out of this is important. We'll have to see what July 9th and 14th brings.
Well, yeah, but then we could also have an extension, right? And this is the difficulty, is that there's of course, trade and tariffs, and then they get negotiated again, and then they get pushed away.
Indeed, it can happen. We get another extension, and is something that, of course, companies would like to see another extension to prepare further. But I think what is really clear is you need more strategic planning, you need scenario planning, because it's not just tariffs, of course. It's economic sanctions, export controls, foreign direct investment restrictions. So you have the whole toolkit that you have to take into consideration when you do supply chain mapping nowadays.
I agree with that, but I would just add a word of caution. I don't think we're going to get a big comprehensive deal done by July.
Between Europe and the U.S.
Not going to be possible. I was in the middle of the TTIP negotiations that failed in 2016. We're not going back to that. But what we are capable of doing is having a better dialogue on the Digital Markets Act. We have a better dialogue on the carbon border adjustment issues. We can deal with shipbuilding. We can get some non-tariff issues discussed between Europe and the United States, which have been aggravating, including in areas like autos that are important to the Europeans.
It's things that the U.S. just doesn't want, full stop.
Well, the problem the Europeans face is what is enough to get past this sort of period of instability, uncertainty. So something has to be framed out by July that gives both sides confidence that we're on the right path. I mean, at the end of the day, the UK-US deal was not a big deal, right? But it moved us past a sense of instability in the U.S.-UK relationship. There are still outstanding questions around steel, but we moved forward. And I think what American business wants, and probably European business, is a sense that the two governments are committed to working together, that the outline of the deal is done, we bring the tariff threats down, and we make some progress on non-tariff measures.
Anahita,
that would be a win.
Yeah, I mean, the UK-US deal, frankly, wasn't great. I mean, it's still much higher tariffs than we had pre-Liberation Day for the UK. So it was kind of like an appeasement. And actually, the US was much less aggressive on the UK than the rest of Europe.
Especially when you look at other comprehensive deals. This is just a mini deal, I would say. And I agree with you. I do not expect a comprehensive T-type agreement with the European Union, but more than what we have seen with the UK, I think is also in the interest of the United States.
Can Europe look further east?
Well, I think when you look at the companies, they have been looking for other options all the time, not just for China, Vietnam, but also India is a free trade ally in the sense that we are negotiating with India a comprehensive deal. And what is also interesting, if we look at the global landscape, how unlikely countries are negotiating suddenly now. China, Japan, Korea. So I think that the tension that we're seeing here leads to countries looking further, but at the same time, the U.S. is such a strong market. We will never look we have to take the U.S. always into consideration.
Myron, we know that the European Union also wants, China to resolve all of the export issues around rare earth magnets before meeting with their leaders next month. Where does this leave the U.S.? I mean, does Europe now have to choose between China and the U.S., or can they do a bit of both?
Well, it's a good topic to raise because obviously another component of the U.S.-EU negotiations is how to deal with China. And there have been differences in approaches, partly driven by the German dynamic in this equation. But not only. I think that the United States and Europe can get closer on how to manage through, because we both need rare earths in a variety of industries, from tech to autos to other industries. So we need to keep the supply of rare earths. That was what was negotiated in London and previously in Geneva. But we still have export controls that are coming down the pike. And they're going to be issues that the United States and Europe have to kind of figure out how to work with. Because not only export controls, we have 232 actions coming that also impact the EU, U.S., and the, obviously, relationship with China. And they're in semiconductors. They're going to be in pharmaceutical products. And this is another area of tension if we don't get alignment strategically between Europe and the United States.
But Myron, so let's say defense spending goes up to like 5% of GDP for most European countries. Does that soften the Trump administration stance on Europe?
You know, Trump has been very good about taking a win, pocketing it, and then going forward and trying to continue to push the agenda in other areas. I think it creates the right mood, but it doesn't solve the ultimate problem that he has on the trade agenda. Again, Europe has a $230 billion trade surplus with the United States. Obviously, we have a roughly $5 trillion economic partnership. $2 trillion of that is trade, 16 million jobs. So both countries are tied together in very strategic and important economic ways. But Trump feels that Europe has gotten away, too much, and he wants to get something out of it. He wants to win. Europeans want to be on equal footing, but Trump wants to win out of this. So there's going to have to be a meeting of the minds on that at the end of the day.
And Anahita, one of the other questions that we always ask is actually, the person to negotiate on behalf of Europe is the Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen. We understand that Donald Trump would like to negotiate directly with the leaders. Yep. Are we going to see a little bit of that actually at the NATO summit that, again, is the biggest sticking point when it comes to trade and tariffs?
Of course, they will be involved, and they will be significantly involved. Of course, our new chancellor has been to the U.S. He has close ties to the U.S., so he will definitely has a say in this. But Ursula von der Leyen has the right and the obligation to negotiate, of course.
All right, thank you both for joining us. Anahita, Thoms, their partner at Baker & McKenzie, and Myron Brilliant, senior counsel at DGA Group. Now back to our top story. U.S. President Donald Trump again disputed an intelligence report that found the airstrikes he ordered on Iran had only a limited impact on the nuclear program. Now, he spoke a short while ago at the NATO summit.
Look at the before and the after picture. Everything above is burned black, the trees, everything. There's one building, but that's a building that sunk substantially into the granite, so that, the fire goes right over it. I believe it was total obliteration. I believe they didn't have a chance to get anything out because we acted fast.
Well, joining us now is Rosalind Matheson, our EMEA news director, who's also been manning the NATO summit blog. Ros, why is Donald Trump still disputing the Pentagon view?
Well, it's interesting. So, of course, he just sat down a short time ago with the NATO Secretary Mark Rutte, and he used some of that to talk about NATO, but also, again, to come back and dispute these intelligence findings from his own Pentagon, I would add, that cast doubt on how much damage these US bombing did of these Iran nuclear sites. And what the Pentagon report is saying is in line, really, with what the UN nuclear monitors, the IAEA, are saying, which is, yes, these strikes did some damage, but we're really unclear how deep the bombs went and whether some of the centrifuges were damaged or not. And the question is then, how much did you set back Iran's nuclear program? Is it by a matter of just months? Is it by years? Is it more? Donald Trump using the conversation a few minutes ago to say that he thinks they've set back the Iran nuclear program by many, many years. However, again, the Pentagon report, the IAEA, is saying it's too soon to tell, and it doesn't appear that they've done that because, again, what we've got is 400 kilograms of fairly higher enriched uranium on the move, potentially somewhere in Iran. The monitors have lost track of it. They don't know where it is. That might give Iran the potential to move fairly quickly to build a nuclear weapon if they wanted to, perhaps within a matter of a year. So they do possibly still retain some ability there on the nuclear front. But Donald Trump really coming out his own intelligence findings there, disputing them and saying obviously that media have been overplaying them and therefore being quite critical as a result.
Ros, thank you so much. Ros Matheson there with the very latest, of course, on this NATO summit. NATO leaders meeting in The Hague against the backdrop of conflicts in the Ukraine and the Middle East. We heard just a couple of moments ago from Rutte and, of course, Donald Trump. A pretty fiery exchange. We're now waiting for the family picture in The Hague. Their leaders about to join Mark Rutte on set. We'll continue following this NATO summit very closely. Donald Trump also casting doubts on Article 5. Up next, Bloomberg Brief, and this is Bloomberg.